Welcome back from the lunch. We hope you're able to enjoy something really refreshing for lunch. We do have a few housekeeping reminders about CE information that we wanted to share with you. In addition to the speaker evaluation, we have our final evaluation, which will be available later this afternoon from our one-stop shop link. This final survey is the mechanism by which you'll receive the certificate of attendance, which will support CE credits for RAPS, SOCRA, SQA, and ACRP. Be sure to download the certificate immediately upon completing the survey. It cannot be downloaded otherwise, and you may miss the opportunity to do so. Even if you don't want or need the certificate, please take a few minutes to complete the conference evaluation, as your feedback will help guide the design of our future events. Know that the evaluation and the certificate are only available for 2 weeks, and that takes us to April the 27th. To summarize, for our physicians, pharmacists, and nurses claiming continuing education credits, CEs are only available if you registered via Adobe Connect and attend in real time. SBIA will issue the CE claim code and instructions to all attendees later today. So be sure to complete the CE session evaluation on or before April the 27th. I apologize in advance, but we are unable to make exceptions to that deadline. Attendees have 14 days from the last day of the activity to log in, complete the required CE evaluations, and attest to their attendance to claim credit. Today's email will have both the claim code and instructions together with the survey link. As a reminder, all sessions are being recorded. It'll take us about 5 to 7 business days to process the recordings, but you'll soon be able to access them from SBI's webpage, and we hope you've already bookmarked that webpage. That's fda.gov/CDER SBIA Learn. Moving into our presentations, our first of several presentations in this session is on GDUFA III Metrics. Our first presenter on this topic is Ted Sherwood. Ted has been the director of the Office of Regulatory Operations within OGD since 2014. ORO consists of 3 divisions: Division of Project Management, Division of Filing Review, and Division of Labeling Review. Previously, he served as the Associate Director of Immediate Office Operations, Office of Pharmaceutical Science, now the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. Prior to joining OPQ in 1999, he spent a dozen years in OGD. He held various positions, including reviewing new submissions for determination of fileability, conducting program analysis, and coordinating congressional activities. Our second presenter on metrics is Dr. Russell Storms, who's the Associate Director for Analytics in the Office of Regulatory Operations in OGD. Dr. Storms is responsible for the timely and accurate management of all data calls, reporting, and analysis within OGD in support of the Generic Drug User Fee Act. Our next presentation is on GDUFA III Impact on DMF Assessment. Our presenter, Dr. Yanni Pereira, is a senior chemist in the Division of Lifecycle API in the Office of New Drug Products within OPQ. She has assisted in the design, optimization, and management of the GDUFA completeness assessment process and the timely consult and early information request process for drug master files. In addition to her role as a primary reviewer in the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls of generic API, Gianni also serves as a secondary reviewer for completeness assessments. Recently, she served in the GDUFA III DMF Implementation Working Group and assisted in drafting the GDUFA III solicited off-cycle and prior assessments SOPs. Following this presentation, we'll present on the facility-related updates in GDUFA III. Our presenter, Dr. Daniel Oberzat, is currently the branch chief of the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment in the Division of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing 1, Branch 2. He was previously a primary and secondary assessor in OPMA with assessments including immediate release solid oral dosage forms, modified release solid oral dosage forms, liquid dosage forms, and lyophilized dosage forms. Prior to joining OPMA, Dan worked in the Office of Lifecycle Drug Products and a branch concentrating on immediate release solid oral dosage forms. Dan represents OPMA to the OPQ Panorama Platform Drivers Group, participates on multiple OPMA CASA template working groups, assists with the OPMA SharePoint homepage, and represents OPMA on the OPQ IT Task Force, and is also participating in the Facility Evaluation Nexus Transition Working Group. Our third presentation is on the quality considerations for developing complex generics. Our presenter, Dr. Kumar Subramanian, serves as a senior pharmaceutical quality assessor in the Office of Lifecycle Drug Products, OPQ. Kumar joined FDA in 2014 as a chemistry reviewer and served as a primary reviewer, secondary reviewer, and application technical lead in the division of liquid-based products 1 for ANDA applications. Kumar has extensive experience in the review of complex peptide drug products, topical products, and parenteral products. He also serves as the SME for peptide drug products and topical products and is involved in product-specific guidances, controlled correspondences, and pre-ANDA meeting requests. Our final presentation is on the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies for generic drugs, use of a drug master file, and REMS modifications. Our first presenter in this final presentation is Jennifer Sarche, who joined the FDA in 2014 and currently serves as one of the REMS coordinators within OGD. As a REMS coordinator, she serves as a liaison between the agency and industry regarding REMS for generic drugs. Prior to her current role, she worked as a regulatory project manager in the Office of New Drugs. For the second part of this presentation, we welcome Charles Chuck Kearns, who's also a REMS coordinator within OGD. As a REMS coordinator, he serves as a liaison between the agency and industry regarding REMS for generic drug approvals to help mitigate known risks of certain drugs. He has prior regulatory experience in FDA as a field investigator and in the Center of Medical Devices and Radiological Health in both pre-market and post-market roles. Please join me in welcoming our first presenter in this session, Ted Sherwood.
Hello, and welcome to the GDUFA III Metrics presentation given by myself, Russell Storms, the Associate Director for Analytics within the Office of Regulatory Operations within the Office of Generic Drugs, along with Mr. Ted Sherwood, the Office Director for the Office of Regulatory Operations within the Office of Generic Drugs. Today I'll be giving an overview of the GDUFA III Generic Drugs monthly and quarterly activities report, and then Ted Sherwood will be providing an explanation of some of the key stats, some relevant observations, along with what to watch for. There are two learning objectives for this presentation. One, describe the layout of the new GDUFA III Generic Drugs Program monthly and quarterly activities report. And two, recognize the salient metrics of the GDUFA III program monthly and quarterly activities report. In line with these objectives, during this presentation, you will be giving two challenge questions. Now let's get into the overview of the new GDUFA III Generic Drugs monthly and quarterly activities report. You can see the link to the new report and a partial screenshot of the report itself. The specific reporting requirements for this report are based on the GDUFA III commitment letter. The commitment letter specifies which metrics are to be reported and when the metrics should be reported, either monthly, quarterly, or annually. Also, the data presented in this public-facing report includes all actions completed during the specified time frame, regardless of receipt date. This is different from the GDUFA Annual Congressional Performance Report, where performance is based on the fiscal year of receipt. So let's go into more detail on the layout of this report. But first, let's see the derivation of this report. For GDUFA II, we had one report for the required monthly reporting activities and another separate report for the quarterly reporting requirements. However, with GDUFA III, we combined the monthly and quarterly activities into one report. In terms of the new monthly reporting, we use the term activities as opposed to performance. For the monthly report is counting the actions, not the goals, which are captured in the annual performance report. The layout is different, which I will describe in more detail on the next slide. Also, we're not publishing preliminary metrics like we did with GDUFA II. These were the approvals, the tentative approvals, the first generics, complete responses, and the receipts. Instead, we publish all the metrics once a month. We are also reporting more data on a monthly basis exceeding GDUFA III commitment requirements, of which I will go into more detail shortly. As for the layout, there are four main sections. The monthly actions, the monthly submissions are also referred to as receipts, the quarterly approval and tentative approval times, and notes and abbreviations. For the layout of the monthly actions, the approvals, tentative approvals, and complete responses are now listed first in the report. These were part of the GDUFA II preliminary metrics that I just talked about. Also posted up front are the imminent actions for the approvals and tentative approvals, which is an annual requirement that we're posting earlier with the monthly metrics. Listed at the bottom of the monthly actions section are the ANDAs awaiting FDA and applicant actions, which are now listed monthly per GDUFA III. This is a quarterly requirement, but we're posting this monthly. For the layout of the monthly submissions, we've listed the typical submissions along with the complex product ANDA submissions, which per GDUFA III is a quarterly requirement, but we're posting the complex products monthly. Also listed in the bottom portion of the submissions are a variety of meetings and teleconferences. Per GDUFA III, this is an annual requirement, but we're posting these on a monthly basis. And now for the first challenge question. In the new Generic Drugs Program monthly and quarterly activities report, approvals are listed A, first, B, third, C, last, or D, none of the above. And the answer is A. In the new Generic Drugs Program monthly and quarterly activities report, approvals are listed first. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide an overview of the new GDUFA III Generic Drugs Program monthly and quarterly activities report. And I will now be followed by my boss, Mr. Ted Sherwood, the Office Director for the Office of Regulatory Operations within the Office of Generic Drugs.
Thanks to Russell Storms for a thorough overview of the Generic Drugs Monthly and Quarterly Activities Report. Now we are going to highlight the meaning of some of these metrics. First, I want to point out that a majority of the program metric requirements are reported based on the fiscal year. This aligns with budget preparation, justifications, etc., congressional reporting, and the GDUFA commitment letter. When possible, the program uses the monthly and quarterly activities reports to address official statistical requests. There are some exceptions, such as the OGD annual report that captures calendar year performance statistics. We expect a difference between fiscal and calendar year data. A metric that we often receive questions about is tentative approval actions. The definition of a tentative approval is that the drug product is ready for approval except for patent or exclusivity protections. Therefore, we count every issuance of a tentative approval. The counting of actions means that the same ANDA may be tentatively approved multiple times. Subsequent tentative approvals occur when applicants update their ANDAs prior to the patent or exclusivity expiration, waiver, etc. These updates include everything from small issues to new facilities and formulations. There are several reasons for taking this approach. It's easier to track the raw counts rather than having to research the history of the application to determine if the new tentative approval counts towards our statistics. Real work is being submitted as a real amendment, which receives a real GDUFA goal date. That means real work is done by the team, possibly even inspections. Under user fees, FDA must account for and plan for this work. Tentative approvals must be otherwise ready for approval beyond the patent and exclusivity protection. That means everything from facilities to labeling. It also means that the formal approval package and endorsements must be completed, as is done for a full approval. This is work for all the disciplines and regulatory project managers, well above that for complete response letters. Issuing a tentative approval for subsequent changes makes it easier for applicants and the FDA to convert the application to approval. This makes it easier to issue full approvals on the earliest lawful approval date. And for work on amendments to tentative approvals under the PEPFAR program, real patients are depending on us. Another area where there appears to be confusion is imminent actions. This is basically a renaming of the imminent approval process from GDUFA II. The process applies to both approvals and tentative approvals. The process, timing, etc. is largely unchanged from GDUFA II. Imminent actions are used in a few situations. The first situation is skipping a tentative approval by the goal date to facilitate full approval within 60 days after the goal date. This occurs in cases when FDA completes its work by the goal date and could issue a tentative approval, but a full approval could be issued within 60 days of the goal date. The logic supporting this use of the imminent action process is that issuing the tentative approval might not leave enough time for the applicant to request full approval and the FDA to complete work to issue the approval on the earliest possible date. This is a win for the applicant, FDA, and the patient. Another common situation relates to aligning the application to reach approval or tentative approval by a forfeiture date. And in the case captured on this slide, to bring an application to approval or tentative approval within the current cycle. Most frequently, this process is invoked to finish the labeling just after the other disciplines become adequate. However, it is not limited to labeling, as quality and bio also use this imminent action process. Note that this is not limited to the first cycle. In the typical situation, a late cycle information request or discipline review letter is issued by FDA with a request for a responding amendment to be sent from the applicant a little ahead of the GDUFA goal date so that FDA has time to conduct a triage of the amendment to determine if it looks good. If not, FDA will try to quickly convert that to a complete response letter within the terms of the commitment letter. However, FDA is hopeful that most of the time the responding amendment is satisfactory, and FDA can use the imminent action 60-day period to bring that discipline to adequate and complete the much more intensive approval or tentative approval package endorsement. Note that the imminent action space is 60 days from the goal date. There is some harm to FDA in using the imminent action process. When successful, it often reduces the number of tentative approval actions. If FDA's goal is to increase the tentative approval stats, we would not use imminent actions. Instead, FDA sees the value. It reduces the number of endorsement packages, which we previously indicated is significant real work for all the disciplines and regulatory project managers. It helps industry line up approval and market entry, and it helps the patients access these wonderful products. There has been some questioning of the differences between the mean and median approval time. Note that both are calculated from the acknowledged application to the first approval or tentative approval action. That is the true measure of how quickly a good application can flow through the process to approval. I do want to point out that there is likely to be variability from quarter to quarter as FDA assessment times may be impacted by workload fluctuations and cycles. Also note that the time to approval includes time spent with industry. There may also be fluctuations as clusters of approvals are issued. The slower mean time reflects the impact of older ANDAs on the data set. We recently issued an approval on a 17-year-old ANDA. That distorts the results. The faster median time is a better indicator of what will happen to a new quality submission. Now, I will provide some observations. Regarding program health, we often hear concern as there are typically more raw receipts than approvals. That is to be expected. Not every ANDA is approved. Some are refused. If that application is resubmitted, it is added to the raw receipts total again. Some ANDAs are withdrawn. Therefore, a better indicator of program health is receipts versus refused to file plus withdrawal of unapproved ANDAs plus approvals. Of course, original applications are only part of the larger program. There is increasing interest in supplements. We see this in the form of more communications from industry, more submissions, and more questions and tracking from high in the chain of command. The purpose of imminent actions is not just to protect FDA goal date compliance, but to help industry navigate when to submit their amendments. For example, for a typical application that receives a weekend goal date, FDA must issue the action letter on the Friday before the weekend, or it is a miss. However, if the ELOD date is on a weekend, FDA cannot take an approval action until the next business day. If the goal date is just prior to or on the ELOD, which falls on a weekend or holiday, the imminent action path can be used to issue the approval on the next business day. Factor this in when determining the date to make your submissions, especially conversion requests. A few things to watch. Beyond the new monthly and quarterly activities report, there will be a revised GDUFA III performance report and a separate fiscal year web posting report. Hopefully, the median approval time will drop as new submissions are more successful due to the enhanced communications and goal date extensions. Before you worry, fewer complete response letters reported may be a sign that the GDUFA III extensions are working. Similarly, fewer minor amendments received is another sign of extension success. If your refused to receive rate is lower than average, that means FDA's filing information requests are working and your regulatory affairs department is healthy. If you experience fewer goal date misses, that means FDA is healthy and your applications are healthy. If your ANDA is approved on the ELOD, that means that FDA's efforts to bring applications to approval by the ELOD is working and your ANDA is healthy. If your approval times are lower than the average, that means the ANDA program is healthy and your applications are healthy with good communications to supporting drug master files. If you don't receive approval on the last business day prior to an ELOD, that might mean that the program is healthy and your ANDA is on track for an approval on the next business day. Contact your regulatory project manager to confirm and check your champagne supply. Now for a quiz. Do imminent actions count as meeting the goal date if A, the approval or tentative approval is in a subsequent cycle, B, the approval or tentative approval is prior to the goal date, C, the approval or tentative approval is within 60 days of the goal date, D, the approval or tentative approval is 61 days after the goal date. The correct answer is C, the approval or tentative approval is within 60 days of the goal date. In conclusion, there are lots of published data to help assess the success of GDUFA III and the ANDA program and even your company. The program is healthy and we look forward to your applications. Thank you for your interest in the GDUFA III metrics.
Hello everyone, my name is Jayani Pereira. I am a senior chemist with the Division of Lifecycle API. Thank you for the opportunity to present the GDUFA III impact on DMF assessment. And the objective of this presentation is to provide you with an overview of the impact of two DMF-related GDUFA III enhancements on DMF assessments. I will go the high-level overview of the two DMF enhancements, present some data, and also go over some key points on both processes. And finally, I will share with you some key takeaways for the prior assessment process. Let's start with the assessment of DMF solicited off-cycle amendments. Under GDUFA I and GDUFA II, solicited amendments were not picked up for review until there is an open ANDA review cycle. So what's new in GDUFA III? Under GDUFA III, FDA will assess the solicited amendments without an open ANDA application, and the priority will be given to the amendments related to ANDAs for which acceptability of the DMF assessment may result in an approval. Let's now take a look at the high-level implementation process. When a solicited amendment is submitted and also a notification is received, we triage the amendment for priority. If an amendment is prioritized, it will be assigned for review and a DMF review target date will be assigned. The trigger for the FDA to start the triage process is the response notification email to the DMF OGD mailbox. This is not something new. We always ask you to notify us when a response is submitted. In this situation, however, it's more important that you continue to send your response notifications so that we can start the triage process right away. This way we can get the review started as quickly as possible. So let's talk about what's the impact of this GDUFA III enhancement on DMF assessment. Here we have an opportunity to do earlier assessment to get the DMF to an adequate status more quickly. By assessing the solicited DMF amendments upon submission, rather than waiting for an application assessment cycle to open, the goal is to reduce the number of cycles and total time to ANDA approval. We estimate between 70 to 100 solicited off-cycle amendments will be picked up for review annually under this enhancement. This is the solicited off-cycle data for the last 6 months. We have received a total of 170 solicited amendments during this time. These are both off-cycle amendments, that means there is no open application, and on-cycle amendments, that is there is an open application. Out of these 170, 89 were triaged as off-cycle, and 36 were prioritized and assigned for off-cycle assessment under GDUFA III. So basically, we are on track with our estimate of 70 to 100 prior assessments on an annual basis. So this is a significant impact on the DMF assessments since we are picking up a significant number of solicited off-cycle amendments under GDUFA III. As I mentioned before, we triage the solicited amendments upon receipt, usually within a week. The amendments which are prioritized under this enhancement will be assigned for review with a DMF review target date of 120 days. And as soon as we make the priority assignment, we will notify the DMF holder via email that the solicited amendment has been picked up for review and what the review target date is. Please note that no email is sent unless the solicited amendment is prioritized under GDUFA III. So to continue with the key points under the solicited off-cycle enhancements, there are a couple of instances when this assigned DTD can be changed. First instance is after we assign the off-cycle amendment and the DTD is communicated to the DMF holder. Let's say if a referencing application opens requiring an earlier DTD consistent with an application goal date, then the DTD is adjusted to an earlier date to meet the ANDA goal date. The second instance is where the DTD could be changed is if an unsolicited amendment is submitted after the off-cycle assignment is made. Then the DTD we communicated to the DMF holder may be extended. So in the email communication to the DMF holder, we recommend that you limit the submission of unsolicited amendments to the DMF while the solicited amendment is being assessed. This is actually to facilitate the completion of the DMF assessment. A scenario where a DTD would not be changed is when a referencing application opens requiring a later DTD consistent with an application goal date. In this case, the DTD will not be changed. The DMF assessment will be completed by the date communicated to the DMF holder. Let's now go over the second DMF enhancement in the GDUFA III commitment letter, that is DMF review prior to ANDA submission. So what are prior assessments? I split it into two categories, one for ANDA and its amendments, and the other for prior approval supplement submissions, PASS. So the first one is the review of Type 2 Drug Master files for API before the submission of a certain ANDA and its amendments. And there are certain criteria that should be met. The prior assessment request should be submitted 6 months prior to the application plan submission date. The review request comes from the DMF holder, and this is available for newly submitted DMFs and previously unreviewed DMFs. Basically, what this means is if the DMF previously had a full technical review to support an application, the DMF would not be eligible under this enhancement. Also, there are certain application-related criteria that should be met before the DMF is picked up for review during the 6 months prior to the ANDA submission. I will not be going over those criteria during this presentation. So I refer you to the prior assessment draft guidance published in October last year and the SBIA DMF workshop held in November last year. Links to both added at the end of this presentation for your convenience. The second type is a request for prior assessment for a prior approval supplement submission, a PAS, to add a new API source. In this case, the PAS should be for a drug product that could help mitigate or resolve a drug shortage, or a PAS for a drug product that could help address a public health emergency. Due to the public health impact, FDA always try to expedite prior approval supplement submissions when a new API source is added for a drug shortage or public health emergency drug product. This is to have faster approvals. Therefore, what the industry can do is to submit these type of prior approval supplements, PASs, as a GDUFA III prior assessment request. I will touch this again towards the end of my presentation. For more information regarding how to submit a prior assessment request for a PAS, I refer you to the prior assessment draft guidance and the CDER SBIA DMF workshop we had last year. Let's now go over the high-level implementation process of the prior assessment. So when a prior assessment request is received, we triage it based on the guidelines in the draft guidance. If basic information is missing from your request, part of our process is we give you a chance to fix the request by issuing a 5-day information request. If you would like us to send an IR when there is missing information, you need to get a secure email address. We cannot send the IR via fax or regular mail due to the short turnaround of these IRs. After the triage is complete, we either grant or deny the request. If granted, a grant letter is issued and the review is conducted, and if there are any deficiencies, they will be communicated to you in an IR letter. So you are receiving this IR about 4 to 5 months earlier than you would under the GDUFA II process. So this is a significant enhancement. If denied, a deny letter is issued. So similar to the solicited off-cycle process, a notification to the DMF OGD mailbox when you submit your prior assessment request is very important, since this notification ensures timely processing. So let's go over this GDUFA III timeline, which clearly shows the impact of prior assessments on the DMF assessments. I'm going to focus on a few points of this timeline. So prior to the GDUFA III, a DMF is not picked up until after the ANDA filing decision is made, which is about 2 months after the ANDA is received. The DMF prior assessment enhancements allows for the start of the scientific review before the ANDA is even received. So by the time the ANDA is received, the first IR has been sent to the DMF holder. So this will give the DMF holders more time to address and respond to any deficiencies, and also for the agency to likely send 2 more communications if needed. This is provided the responses to the IRs are submitted in a timely way. So you can see in this timeline, this longer DMF review clock allows for a real chance of multiple DMF review cycles before the end of the application clock. So what is the impact of prior assessment enhancement on the DMF assessment? We have an opportunity to assess the DMF before the application is received. As we saw on the GDUFA III timeline slide, the longer review clock under this enhancement allows multiple DMF assessment cycles before the end of the GDUFA clock. Multiple assessment cycles mean we can get the DMF to an adequate status more quickly, which is our goal here. This also reduces the number of assessment cycles for the ANDA, which facilitates timely access to the generic drugs for the patients. So this enhancement has real benefits for the DMF review process. Our estimate is about 80 original DMFs might be qualified annually under this enhancement. Even though we have received only 4 prior assessment requests so far, we are very happy to see that the requests started to come in. We hope to receive more of these requests in the coming months. We know it is a new process and takes time to get familiarized with. Out of the 4 requests we have received, 2 have been granted and the other 2 have been denied. We hope that the DMF holders and the applicants would work together and take advantage of the prior assessment process. I'm happy to share with you that the requests we have received so far are well written, and we can see that the industry has been following the draft guidance and also taken advantage of the SBIA DMF workshop we had last November. Some key points on the prior assessment enhancement. Prior assessment requests are triaged upon receipt. And as I mentioned before, we give you a chance to fix the request if there are missing information. We will let you know within 2 weeks whether your request is granted or denied. If denied, a reason for denial will be included in your letter. If granted, we send a grant letter to the requester with the date when the review will be completed, and we assign the DMF for review. The review target date is set to the date you indicate in your request as the planned application submission date. One thing I would like to stress about this enhancement is that you can take advantage of prior assessment process when adding a new API source for a drug shortage prior approval supplement. There's more flexibility for the industry to submit a prior assessment request for a drug shortage or public health emergency product. Under these criteria, the DMF holders can include a request to waive the normal 6-month condition in their cover letter when they are unable to provide the request 6 months in advance. We hope that the industry would take advantage of these criteria when submitting a prior assessment request. Planning ahead is actually the key. DMF holders and ANDA applicants should communicate with each other before submitting a prior assessment request for things such as the citation to the reference listed drug, pre-assigned ANDA number, justification statement, and the ANDA plan submission date. To submit a valid prior assessment request, please refer to the prior assessment draft guidance that was published last year and the SBIA DMF workshop, which was held last November. During the workshop, we went over what should be included in a valid prior assessment request. And we also provided sample cover letter for you to use. And you can always email the DMF OGD mailbox if you have any questions. To conclude, GDUFA III allows for assessment of DMFs outside of an application to enhance first cycle approvals and reduce the number of cycles to approval to make the generic drugs available more quickly. The communication between the DMF holder and the ANDA applicant is essential when it comes to prior assessment request. And communication with the FDA, that is emailing the DMF or GD mailbox when you submit a response to a deficiency letter or when you submit a prior assessment request, is also very important. Please refer to the prior assessment draft guidance and the SBIA workshop when submitting a prior assessment request. Here are some links to useful resources, and this also includes a link to the draft guidance and the SBIA DMF workshop. This concludes my presentation. I would like to thank Dave, Erin, and Jennifer for their input on this presentation. Thank you to SBIA for organizing this event and the opportunity to present today. And finally, I would like to thank you all for your attention. I will be back shortly to answer any questions during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dan Upjut, and I'm here to discuss facility-related updates in GDUFA III. There are two significant facility-related updates in GDUFA III. The first is the reclassification of facility-based major complete response letter amendments. The second is related to goal dates on submissions with facilities not ready for inspection. Reclassification of facility-based major complete response letter amendments can be found in the GDUFA III commitment letter in section 2C7, which is on pages 17 through 18. So what is reclassification? Upon submission of a facility-based major complete response letter amendment, an applicant can request that the FDA reclassify the major amendment to minor when applicable criteria are met. I'd like to give just a brief overview of the reclassification request process. So a map with more details will be provided soon, and this will include instructions on requesting reclassification and providing supportive information. So generally, a request must be made at the time of a complete response letter response amendment submission. Requests for reclassification in subsequent amendments will be denied. Also, the complete response letter should be less than 1 year old. Exceptions can be made in the case of a drug shortage or public health emergency. In this submission, there should be supportive information on why the facility deficiency is resolved and why no additional facility assessment is needed. So the FDA will use certain criteria to assess if a reclassification will be granted. So I think the first and most importantly is no facility inspection is needed. So in this case, this indicates that a facility is no longer under an official action indicated or facility alert. No pre-approval inspection is necessary. Additionally, no use of alternative tools are needed. So this includes a 704A4 evaluation or a remote interactive evaluation. No continued inspection, no continued assessment of inspection deficiency responses are needed. So if facility deficiencies were sent after the observations were issued to the facility, there may need to be additional assessment. And also, a facility deficiency was not sent as a result of a PAI. And finally, no other major deficiencies should be included on that complete response letter. So if there's a major deficiency related to something that was submitted in the application, again, the reclassification would be denied in addition to facilities. I did single out that pre-approval inspection facility deficiencies would be a reason to deny reclassification. In the complete response letter facility deficiencies at this time, we're issuing deficiencies that indicate whether it is related to a surveillance inspection or a pre-approval inspection. And this is because if you do have a pre-approval inspection facility deficiency, it is going to require continued assessment of inspection deficiency responses, which again will result in reclassification being denied. This is because unresolved inspection deficiencies from PAIs are sent to the site in the post-action letter, which is sent after the complete response letter is sent to the applicant. Responses to the PAL are only assessed along with the complete response letter response. There are a couple of notable timeline changes that go along with this reclassification. So if an applicant submits a request for reclassification, the FDA will respond either within 60 days of that amendment submission date or 30 days of the amendment submission date, depending on whether it is a standard major amendment or priority major amendment, respectively. If reclassification is granted, the goal date will be changed based on the submission date. This will either be 5 months for a standard major amendment or 4 months for a priority major amendment. So now I'd like to walk through a couple scenarios and allow you to determine if a facility-based major complete response letter would be reclassified if requested. In scenario 1, White Oak Manufacturing Facility received a deficiency in the complete response letter related to a PAI. So the PAI occurred on October 13th, 2022. There were 4 observations, 2 which remain unresolved as indicated in the post-action letter. The complete response letter was sent on December 13th, 2022. Then the White Oak facility received no observations after the most recent surveillance inspection on January 1st, 2023. If reclassification was requested, would it be granted? No, the reclassification would be denied. An adequate surveillance inspection does not indicate that product-specific issues have been resolved, and continued assessment of the inspection deficiency responses to resolve the issue indicated on the post-action letter would be required. So in our next scenario, the Rockville Manufacturing Facility received a deficiency in the complete response letter that was related to the surveillance inspection. The application was submitted in 2018, and a surveillance inspection occurred shortly after, and it resulted in a warning letter. A complete response letter was sent on October 16, 2022. Rockville received no observations after a surveillance inspection on November 22nd, 2022. Now, for this application, the manufacturing is for a capsule filled with extended release pellets made using a fluidized bed coating, which was not covered in the inspection. Previously, the facility only manufactured immediate release tablets by direct compression. Would a reclassification request be granted in this situation? And again, the reclassification would be denied because in this case, since there's much more complexity in the current application versus what the site had manufactured prior, a pre-approval inspection would need to be scheduled for the application. In scenario 3, we again have a surveillance inspection related deficiency, and this is for the Silver Spring manufacturing facility. The application was originally submitted in May 16, 2021. In March 2022, there was a surveillance inspection resulting in a OAI. A complete response letter for the application was sent on December 16, 2022. There was the 1 facility major deficiency and 4 minor deficiencies. In January of 2023, there was a surveillance inspection which resulted in no observations. the facility previously manufactured IR tablets by direct compression, which is also the current product is also an immediate release tablet made by direct compression. In this case, would reclassification be granted? In this case, yes, reclassification should be granted if there are no additional concerns. The CGMP issues identified during the initial surveillance inspection were resolved per the second surveillance inspection, and for reclassification may be granted even if there are additional minor deficiencies. Now, if there were, say, major deficiencies, additional major deficiencies, then reclassification would not be granted. With that, I'd like to move on to submissions with facilities not ready for inspection. This can be found in the GDUFA commitment letter in section 1A3 on page 5. There's also currently a draft guidance on facility readiness goal date decisions under GDUFA. So this change in GDUFA 3 really relates to the question, is the site ready for inspection? Prior to GDUFA 3, if any site was not ready for inspection, the agency would refuse to receive the application at the filing stage. Under GDUFA 3, if any site is indicated as not ready for inspection, the goal date will be set at 15 months from submission of the original application. So during this initial 15-month goal date, the FDA will conduct a filing review of the application. However, substantive assessment of the application, it will not occur, at least until all facilities are ready for inspection. If an amendment with the 356H form indicates that all facilities are ready for inspection, what is submitted while the goal date is 15 months after the original submission, the goal date is going to be reset based on the date that that amendment is submitted, and it will be either 8 months for priority amendments or 10 months for standard amendments. At that point, a significant assessment of the application will occur. However, if no amendment indicating all facilities are ready for inspection is received by 30 days before the 15-month goal date, the goal date will be changed to 30 months after the original submission. The FDA has committed to assess and act on 90% of applications by the 30-month goal date. Now, it should be noted that if there is a submission which indicates on the 356H form that all facilities are ready for inspection, and that amendment is submitted while the goal date is at this 30 months after the original submission, there will be no resetting of the goal date, and the goal date is going to remain 30 months after the original submission. So again, I'd like to go through a couple scenarios, and in here the question is really, what is the goal date? So in scenario 5, Bethesda Pharmaceuticals submitted a standard review application with one facility marked as not ready for inspection on October 30th, 2022. Since that facility was marked as not ready for inspection, the goal date was set as 15 months after submission as March 30th, 2024. On February 22nd, 2024, they submitted another amendment indicating on the 356H form all facilities were ready for inspection. So in this case, what would be the goal date of the application? The goal date would be set as December 22nd, 2024, which is 10 months after the submission of the amendment, since that submission was submitted within the first 15 months, first 15-month goal date. In the next scenario, Potomac Pharma submits a standard application with one facility marked as not ready for inspection on November 29, 2022. The goal date, therefore, was set as 15 months from that submission date, February 29th, 2024. On January 30th, since no amendment stating that all facilities were ready for inspection had been received, the goal date was extended to May 29th, 2025. On March 15th, 2024, Potomac Pharma submitted an amendment indicating on the 356 form that all facilities are ready for inspection. In this case, what would be the goal date? The goal date would remain as May 29th, 2025. Since the extension had already been reset to 30 months after the original submission, when the amendment indicating that all facilities were ready for inspection was received, the goal date was not changed. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to hearing any questions.
Thank you. I'm Kumara from Office of Lifecycle Drug Products. So wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Next 15 to 20 minutes, I am planning to take you through quality considerations for developing complex generics. Mainly, I'll be focusing my presentation on best practices for successful pre-ANDA meetings and mid-cycle review meetings from the product quality perspective. You might have seen this slide from the agency's stocks. A quality product of any kind consistently meets the expectation of the users. Drugs are no different. One of the things that we could add here is the complex product. It's immaterial whether it's a simple small molecule or a complex peptide. Patients do expect safe and effective medicine with every dose they take. It's what gives patients confidence in their next dose of medicine. Complex products are no different. During this presentation, I would go over pre-ANDA objectives, particularly product development meeting, current program matrices and trends. I would also provide some examples of pre-ANDA package questions and brief outline of mid-cycle review meeting under GDUFA III, and finally conclude with a few recommendations. We have various pre-ANDA programs to facilitate the development of complex generic products. The one is control correspondence, so in which applicants can submit written queries to request information on a specific element of drug development. The common questions are like Q1, Q2 determinations, maximum daily dose, stability orientations, etc. The second one is product developmental meeting, in which ANDA applicant can submit written queries or specific proposals to request agencies' input on scientific and regulatory issues in generic drug development of a complex product. So we will look this one in details in the upcoming slides. The third one is product submission meeting. As the name suggests, this meeting is held before the submission of an ANDA. ANDA applicants can present unique or novel idea or information that will be included in the upcoming ANDA submission. Please note, agency won't provide any opinion on the adequacy of the data or information during the meeting. It's just really about the content and completeness of the upcoming submission. The fourth one is product specific guidance. So based on the internal research and other informations, agency constantly develops product specific guidances which identify the most appropriate methodology for developing complex generic drugs. So what's the main purpose of pre-ANDA development program? Number one, it clarifies the regulatory expectations early in the product development. It also assists the applicants to develop more complete submissions. And most importantly, particularly for a complex product, this would possibly reduce the number of review cycles to obtain an approval. So before we look into the details of pre-ANDA meetings, let's have a quick look at current data on the common reasons for the denial. These pie charts provide information on the common reason of denial. This is our recent data. However, interestingly, the trend has not changed significantly for the past few years, even though the percentage of pre-ANDA acceptance rates are getting better. Nearly 1/3 of pre-ANDA denial are due to incomplete meeting package, and the 1/3 are denied because the questions are more suited for a control correspondence. So how do we avoid these issues? So we need to know the right pathway, whether it is a control correspondence or a pre-development meeting. We have seen from earlier slide that control correspondence generally deals with single element, whereas pre-developmental meeting clarifies mainly the regulatory expectations early in the product development so that we could reduce the number of review cycles required to obtain an ANDA approval, particularly for complex products. So during this presentation, I would provide some examples where you could benefit from asking the right questions in the pre-ANDA meeting package. We know that pre-ANDA development meetings are mainly deals with the complex products. So what's a complex product? Per GDUFA III commitment letter, the complex products are defined as products that has complex active ingredients. For example, peptides, polymeric compounds, complex mixture of APIs, and products that has a complex formulations. For example, liposomes and colloids, and complex dosage forms. For example, complex suspensions, emulsions, transdermal systems, metered-dose inhalers, extendable release injectables, and complex routes of delivery. For example, complex dermatological products, complex ophthalmological products, and finally, complex drug-device combination products. Example, I would say pre-fill auto-injector products, metered-dose inhalers. Please note, GDUFA III also defines other products that can be benefited from early pre-ANDA development meeting, where the product has some complexity or uncertainty concerning the approval pathway, or you need agency's input on taking alternate possible pathway. So, what are the potential OPQ topics for a PDEM meeting? One of the major OPQ topics would be characterization of a complex API, higher order structure, or aggregation profile of the finished product. You know, the characterization of the complex API might require product-specific analytical techniques. It would be a potential topic to clarify the agency's expectations. And then there are products that are not covered under ICH guidance. You might like agency's inputs in setting up the limits. Or let's say you have a complex peptide. You would like the agency's input on the requirement of immunogenicity assessment. Another common topic related to topical products are physicochemical and structural characterization requirements to demonstrate the Q3 sameness. In solid oral dosage forms, dissolution testing or some analytical methods. And device evaluation for drug-device combination products, and also design of stability studies for such systems. So these are the potential OPQ topics for a PDEM meeting. Now let's look at some examples of pre-ANDA developmental meeting questions. So here is a situation in which firm had a clarifying question on demonstrating API sameness. The firm has proposed physicochemical characterization and structural characterization, and also provide the relevant analytical methods. Please note that all details have been provided in the meeting package. Now the firm wants to know whether the proposed physicochemical characterization and analytical techniques are considered acceptable for demonstrating API sameness between test product and RLD. So this is a good PDEF question. The firm has already provided some early development data, and they would like to know whether the proposed studies are adequate or is there any additional studies are required. So this is another example. So this example related to a complex peptide. It appears the firm is not able to adopt commonly used method for the determination of aggregation profile of the test product. The firm wanted to use a different method. Based on the initial data, the firm wants agency's input whether the proposed methods are acceptable for the determination of aggregation profile of the test product. So these are the good questions for the developmental meeting. The next example is related to immunogenicity risk. The firm performed initial studies and determined the immunogenicity risk of the product is very low. The firm has raised a question whether the agency can agree with the conclusion, or is there any additional in silico or in vitro immunogenicity studies required. So this is another example for a good PDEF questions. Let's take the next example. So this example is related to radiopharmaceuticals. The firm has developed two methods and validated with the specific detection techniques to evaluate the purity of radiopharmaceutical. The firm believes that these methods will adequately demonstrate the radiochemical and chemical purity of the injectable product. The firm wants to know the proposed methods or techniques are acceptable? So this is a classic PDF question. So another example related to the setting of impurity limits. The firm points that ICH guidance does not cover radiopharmaceutical, and the firm wants to propose a control strategy based on the particular guidance. Now they want to know the agency's opinion whether this proposed control strategy is adequate in establishing the acceptance criteria. Let's move to another example on the Q3 sameness. So these two examples are related to a topical product. The first question, the firm wants to demonstrate Q3 sameness of the test product and RLD by performing certain physicochemical and structural characterization, and the firm also included relevant analytical methods. Now the firm wants to know whether the proposed plan is acceptable for demonstrating Q3 sameness. And the second question is very similar to the first one. Here the firm is proposing an in vitro study design to demonstrate the bioequivalence of proposed test product against the RLD. And the firm wants to know the agency's feedback on whether the proposed studies are adequate or any additional in vitro characterization studies are required to demonstrate the bioequivalence of test product against the RLD. So these are the common questions that we receive for the topical products. So here another example on the device. Here the firm is trying to propose a device which has a minor difference compared to RLD. Now the firm performed a few studies and attributed this difference are mainly due to different manufacturer. Now they want to know the agency's feedback whether the proposed evaluation for the packaging component is adequate, or is there any additional studies are required to demonstrate the suitability of the packaging compound. So these are one of the common questions for the device evaluation. So let's move to another example where the question is related to stability studies of the drug device combination product. So this is a product supplied with a vial and a pre-filled syringe, and the pre-filled syringe contains water for injection and the vial contains the drug product. The firm wants to know whether they can place the samples in the stability chamber as individual pack rather than co-packing. So this is a simple example. Please keep in mind, when the firm requests a pre and a meeting, it's not going to be a single question. It will be a multiple question related to a similar issues or multiple issues in the package. So you have seen some of the examples. So based on the examples, what are the recommendations for a pre and a submissions? So apart from familiarizing applicable guidance, ask specific questions about your developmental plan, proposed approach, method, or study design. If possible, try to include some preliminary data to support your proposal. There is absolutely no need to provide too much in detail. So this is not an A&D review. And most importantly, please avoid asking questions on the review issues, like whether the proposed assay limit is acceptable. Agency is not going to provide any definitive answer on the review issues. Let's move on to the next topic. So you had a pre-ANDA meeting and you submitted an ANDA. Now you received a discipline review letter. What are the options? In general, complex generic drug product with granted product developmental meeting would qualify for a mid-cycle meeting. Of course, there are other pathways that you can avail these meetings, which I don't go into details now. So there are two types of review meetings. One is simple mid-cycle review meeting, which we call as MRCM, and the other one is enhanced mid-cycle review meeting, which we'll see in the next slide. So there are some significant changes in GDUFA III regarding MRCM. The most significant change is now that applicant can ask the rationale for any deficiency identified in the discipline review letter. Applicant can also ask questions related to agency's assessment of the data or information in the ANDA. Please note, there won't be any new data discussed in the MRCM meeting. Also, having MRCM meeting will not change your goal date. It only extends the DRL due date for 15 days. Another type of mid-cycle review meeting under GDUFA III is enhanced mid-cycle review meeting, which we call as EMRCM. The main difference here applicants are allowed to ask questions related to a proposed scientific path so that they can address the deficiencies identified in the mid-cycle review letter. Applicant may also ask questions about potential new data to address the deficiencies. However, please note the agency will discuss the data and the information, but will not provide substantive assessment of the data or information in the meeting. Another main difference between MRCM and EMRCM is the goal date will be extended by 60 days. Also, the DRL due date will be recalculated from the date of meeting. Now it's time to review. I have a couple of challenge questions and I hope everyone can answer correctly. So the challenge question 1, does the agency agree that our characterization studies to demonstrate drug product equivalence to RLD based on the FDA's product specific guidance are in line with the FDA's expectations? Even though it would appear as a pre-dev question, actually it's not. If you read the questions carefully, there is already a product specific guidance. The firm is already indicating that the characterization studies are in line with PSG. So there is no regulatory rationale for asking this question. So this is not a appropriate PDF question. Move on to next question. The applicant plans to submit a PDF for a generic product of a synthetic peptide injection solution. Which question is not suitable for a PDF? A. Does the agency agree on the proposed protocol for the adaptive and innate immunogenicity study? B. Does the agency agree on the proposed limit for impurity Z? C. Does the agency agree on the proposed comparative studies to characterize the aggregation profile of test product on RLD? I think this is a straightforward question. As we discussed, pre-ANDA meetings are not intended to provide inputs on the acceptance criteria. So the answer would be B. The take-home message is that please go through all relevant guidances before preparing the meeting package. Based on your specific questions, choose the correct pathway. Most importantly, make sure to provide sufficient preliminary data and supporting information to justify the proposed plan. Here are some of the resources that you could go through, which includes agency's guidance, maps, and GDUFA commitment letter. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all OPQ members who involved in the routine pre-ANDA and ANDA review process, my branch chief Dr. Cameron Smith and Director Dr. Binkai, and thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Sargent and my colleague Mr. Chuck Kearns and I are excited to give you this talk about REMS today. We love our job and we have a fantastic team, so we really love to be able to share what we know about REMS. I want everyone to think about this just for a moment. What if you or someone you knew had a condition such as, let's say, severe acne, or maybe something much more serious such as schizophrenia, or even pulmonary arterial hypertension? Now let's just say each of these conditions could each be treated with 3 different drugs. Now of course this is great news. However, there is one problem. Each of these drugs has very serious safety concerns. Safety concerns so serious that it's questionable if these drugs should even be available on the market. So of course now we have a huge issue to solve. We have these medications that are available, but how do we safely provide these drugs to you or your loved ones and all the other patients out there who need these drugs knowing that they have serious safety concerns? Well, that's where REMS comes into play. REMS provides safe access to certain drugs that may not otherwise be approved and available on the market. So let's go ahead and get started on how REMS works and the use of a drug master file and REMS modifications. There's a lot of information and resources available about REMS, so we decided to kind of narrow our focus to what you see here on the slide. Overall, our goal today is simply to provide you with some practical tips and tricks to use when a REMS is required and how a DMF comes into play when submitting REMS revisions and modifications to your ANDA. So let's start with the obvious. What exactly is a REMS? Well, REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, and it's commonly just referred to as REMS for short. I would say if you could sum up REMS in a few short words, most would probably say it is a drug safety program. And I wanted to bring in just a little bit of a historical perspective and note that it was the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007 that gave FDA the authority to require a REMS from manufacturers. Now again, it's important, this was only for certain medications with serious safety concerns. You're going to hear that a lot throughout the presentation. So the goal here was to help ensure the benefits of a drug outweigh known risks. So ultimately, REMS is meant to be a valuable tool for patient safety and is designed to reinforce medication use behaviors and specific actions that support the safe use of a drug. So moving along to key takeaway number 2 is that while it's true all medications have labeling educating prescribers and patients and even other healthcare professionals about a drug's risks, REMS actually goes beyond the labeling. So you may ask, well, how exactly do you go beyond the labeling? So this is accomplished by requiring a specific risk management plan to ensure the benefits of a drug outweigh known risks. So remember, this only applies to certain medications or drugs with serious safety concerns. And believe it or not, there's only a few drugs that require a REMS, and I would think there's around currently 60 drugs that have a REMS. So relatively speaking, I would say this is a low number compared to the total number of approved drugs currently available in the United States. Now the last point here, we believe it's so important to know that REMS focuses around 3 main areas. They're so important that we have them kind of underlined here on the slide to bring them to your attention. So the first involves communicating to patients. So this is extremely, extremely important. Probably the most common example, let's see, that I can think of this is a medication guide. So although all medication guides are approved as part of the drug's label, a small number of medication guides may also be included as part of a REMS. Now the second point here is communicating with healthcare providers. Those that immediately come to most people's minds are probably doctors, but there may be others such as nurses and pharmacists. But it is just not doctors and nurses and pharmacists. So think about that. There are others involved in the delivery of healthcare, and they may also be included in a REMS. So because if you remember, a REMS is a drug safety program, it is important to look at the bigger kind of overall picture. So let's just see if I can paint a picture of this a little bit. Okay, so one scenario that comes to mind, for example, may be having the manufacturer of a drug communicate specific serious risks and steps to reduce these risks directly with the healthcare professionals. So expanding on this just a little bit further, the manufacturer may need to direct communications about known risks, let's say to a specific target audience. This may be medical professional societies or even state licensing boards to make them aware of the REMS. So again, we're just trying to mitigate these risks at many levels and using a variety of tools to communicate to a large array of people and organizations that may be involved in drugs that have a REMS. Now the third part or area may include requiring activities or clinical interventions before the medication can even be prescribed, dispensed, or received. So let's see, one example of this may involve requiring prescribers to become certified in the REMS, or what we call this drug safety program, through specific education requirements, or maybe even requiring, let's say, documentation of a safe use condition. An example of this may be monthly lab test before being able to dispense the drug to the patient. Now, I know this is a lot of information and maybe more details than what is necessary, but hopefully as we move forward, this will kind of like lay the groundwork of how REMS works and the intent behind REMS when it comes to drug safety. Now that we have defined what a REMS is, the next kind of logical question to ask is, well, when is a REMS necessary? When do I have to have a REMS? Well, REMS are not designed to mitigate every single adverse event, so that's important to know. Rather, REMS really focuses on preventing, monitoring, and managing a specific risk. So you may ask, well, how is this done? Well, the goal is to inform and, of course, educate or reinforce actions to reduce the frequency or severity of the known risks. So this list here provides just a few considerations when determining if a REMS may be necessary. And, of course, there's always more specific details provided in the guidance referenced here on the slide. It is also important to note that the FDA may require a REMS during the pre-approval process or even post-approval. Now, this may happen if the FDA becomes aware of, let's say, new safety information about a drug, and it determines that a REMS is necessary even if the drug has already been approved. So there are different parts of a REMS which are referred to as elements, and they're listed here on the slide. As a side note, the most extensive element of these are usually elements to ensure safe use, or what is commonly referred to as an ATASU. It's also important to know that all REMS programs require the submission of assessments, and these may be used to modify the REMS or in some cases even eliminate the REMS if it is determined that a REMS has repeatedly met its goals. We'll talk more about REMS assessments a little bit later in the presentation. So what are the requirements for ANDAs? Well, if the reference listed drug or RLD has a REMS, then of course all of those ANDAs referencing the RLD must also have a REMS. Now there are a few options to fulfill the REMS requirements. So the first is to choose to join an already existing shared system REMS. Another option is to choose to work with the RLD to develop what is considered a brand new system. Now this option may involve the formation of what's called an industry working group, and this is to help facilitate negotiations and agreements among all of those involved. Also with this option, it's important that all application holders really try to work together to coordinate the submission of their REMS proposals and then any subsequent amendments to submit all of that on the same day if at all possible. And this is simply to help with tracking of all the REMS submissions that come in over time. Now another possibility may be to work independently from the RLD and pursue what's called a separate yet comparable REMS. Now with this one, it's important to understand that with this system, it will have the same goals and ATASU, of course to include most importantly the same level of safety, but the elements of the REMS may be operationalized a little differently. Also with this type of REMS system, it may be an ANDA-only system or may include other ANDAs. And now the last option is much less common and applies to a medication guide-only REMS. I'd like to also point out that the draft guidance for industry shown here is packed full of details and is great reference to use for developing a shared system REMS. So we highly recommend to check this out when navigating kind of the different options we just discussed. Now that we have gone over what is a REMS and when it's necessary and the various elements, we want to discuss some options for actually submitting a REMS. So currently there are two different options for submitting a REMS, and which option you use depends upon whether the REMS uses a DMF or not. So we'll go ahead and describe each of these in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. The first requires a full REMS proposal, and this is needed when there is not an established REMS DMF. So with this option, the REMS submission should include two parts. The first is, of course, the actual REMS, which includes the REMS document and REMS materials. And just for your awareness, some examples of REMS materials may include, let's say, enrollment forms. Some other common types of materials may be training and education materials, patient care forms, or even communication types of materials such as website screenshots. Now the second part of the submission is the REMS supporting document. Now the REMS supporting document just expands on the information in the REMS document and also provides additional information about the REMS, such as, let's think, the rationale, the design, implementation, and the assessment of the REMS. Now, a good tip to be aware of when submitting a full REMS proposal to your application is just to make sure you label or code your submission using the following designator at the top of the first page of your initial proposed REMS submission, and that's in bold capital letters as it's shown here. This ensures that your submission is triaged and coded correctly for a timely review. So just as labeling and other disciplines have interim comments and negotiations, so does REMS. As changes to the REMS are made during the review process, any subsequent submissions or revisions that are made to the original REMS proposal submission are considered REMS amendments. So they are not correspondences. This is very important. They are amendments, and they're titled as such, which again is listed on the slide. In addition, the REMS document should be submitted in SPL format. Moving along to a REMS that have a Type 5 DMF, which makes REMS submissions and review much more simple and efficient. Now, the ANDA applicant should submit a cover letter cross-referencing the DMF and a valid letter of authorization or an LOA to their application. In addition, the same should be submitted to the DMF by the DMF holder. The most important takeaway here, I would say, is that when using a DMF for REMS submission, the applicant does not need to submit a full REMS proposal to their application. Instead, they should only submit a cover letter referencing the REMS DMF and a valid LOA. The draft guidance for industry shown here provides additional details on how to use a DMF for shared system REMS submissions. There are a few other things to know regarding REMS. A REMS notification letter, or what is commonly referred to as an RNL, is a formal letter sent by the Office of Generic Drugs to every new ANDA applicant shortly after the application is accepted for review. Now, this letter officially notifies the applicant holder of the need for a REMS, and it also outlines the REMS requirements and provides points of contact to include not only the name, but also the telephone number and the email address to start the process of joining an established REMS or developing a separate REMS. It's also important to note that a REMS proposal is not required at the initial filing of an ANDA application. However, a statement of intent is definitely recommended and appreciated. Now, this statement of intent should definitely describe which pathway or option the applicant plans to use to fulfill their REMS obligations. Also, if you receive a complete response letter that includes a REMS-only deficiency, and you have not yet submitted a REMS proposal for review, you should include a REMS proposal as part of your resubmission. Now, this concludes the first part of our presentation regarding REMS and REMS submission types. Now, we have just a few simple challenge questions for you. So let's see if I did my job teaching you just a little bit about REMS. Now, the first question is the RLD in your application has a REMS and the REMS does not have an established Type 5 DMF. What should you submit to your application? So I'll give you just a moment, look over the answers before you can select the best one. And I know we are running a little bit short on time, so I won't take too much time before I reveal the answer here, which is C. So if you recall, if there is no DMF, then a full REMS proposal should be submitted. Moving along to the second question, the RLD in your application has a REMS and the REMS has an established Type 5 DMF. What should you submit to your application? And for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer here. It is B. So this is because when there is a DMF, all REMS documents are submitted directly to the DMF, and the authorized ANDAs only need to submit a cover letter and a REMS LOA to their application. And one last question. The RLD in your application has a REMS, and the REMS has an established Type 5 DMF. Who else needs to submit an LOA? Well, there are no options here, so we'll have to use some critical thinking. But hopefully I did a good enough job explaining that it's actually the DMF holder who needs to submit a cross-reference cover letter and an LOA to the DMF file for each ANDA that has the right to reference the DMF. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Chuck Kearns, who will focus more on the post-approval aspects of REMS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. As she mentioned earlier, my name is Chuck Kearns, and I'm very happy to be with you today. Now that we've gone over what a REMS looks like during the pre-approval process, we're going to talk about what happens with the REMS after your application is approved. There are two main responsibilities for REMS programs that occur post-approval. The first are REMS assessments, and the second involves changes that are made to the REMS. REMS assessments provide information about the performance of a REMS and helps determine whether the program is meeting its intended goals. REMS assessments are required for all approved REMS for NDA and BLA products. The assessment for a shared system REMS applies collectively to all products that are subject to the REMS. But in general, a separate REMS assessment submission is not required for ANDAs that are part of a shared system REMS with an RLD. REMS assessments are generally included in the REMS supporting document and must include a timetable for the submission of the assessments. This is commonly referred to as the REMS assessment plan and specifies the nature and content of the periodic assessments. The second major area of a REMS post-approval involves the needed changes to a REMS. Changes can be proposed by the Shared System REMS group, or the FDA may require changes to the REMS, often based on the REMS assessments that we just described. The guidance listed here on the slide provides more details on changes to the REMS. There are typically three main types of changes to the REMS, which may include a REMS revision, a minor modification, or a REMS major modification. The category that the changes to the REMS falls into is usually based on the degree of their potential effect on three main areas. The areas are 1, the information provided in the REMS related to the serious risks, 2, the safe use of the drug, or 3, the actions that the application holder, patients, healthcare providers, and other stakeholders must take to comply with the REMS. These are described in much more detail in the guidance listed here on the slide, but we will describe each option briefly in this presentation. The first option for changes to a REMS is called a REMS revision. A revision is usually the least involved of the three options, and it can be implemented after notification to the FDA as long as the changes are truly only a revision. Revisions are usually editorial changes that do not affect those three main areas that I mentioned on the previous slide: the information contained in the REMS, the safe use of the drug, or the actions that the stakeholders must take to comply with the REMS. Examples of a REMS revision may include changes to the application holder name, the address or contact information, or editorial changes that involve grammar, formatting, or typographical errors. The second type of change to a REMS involves minor modifications. These are submitted as a changes being affected, or CBE supplement, and are defined as changes that have a limited effect on the three areas that were previously described: the information contained in the REMS, the safe use of the drug, or the actions that the stakeholders must take to comply with the REMS. The FDA will review and act on a proposed minor REMS modification within 60 days of the receipt of the modification, and the changes to the REMS are not considered final until approved by the FDA. Examples of a minor modification include the addition or removal of a strength or a dosage of the drug. The last and probably most common type of change to a REMS is a major modification. Major modifications are submitted as a prior approval supplement and are defined as changes that have a substantial effect on those three areas that we discussed earlier: the information contained in the REMS, the safe use of the drug, or the actions that the stakeholders have to take to comply with the REMS. These supplements are reviewed and action is taken within 180 days of the receipt of the modification and cannot be implemented before FDA approval. A few examples here of a major modification are the addition, removal, or change to one of the goals of the REMS, or the addition of new information regarding the risks related to the drug. Now let's talk a little bit about a REMS modification when a DMF is being used for the shared system. As Jennifer discussed earlier regarding the pre-market submissions, there are differences when the REMS uses a DMF and when it does not. The same differences apply to the REMS modifications. After the modification has been submitted to the DMF, ANDAs that have final approval should submit a cross-reference cover letter of the REMS modification to their individual application as soon as possible. ANDAs with final approval will receive a REMS modification decision letter after the review of the modification is complete, which is, as mentioned earlier, 60 days for a minor modification or 180 days for a major modification. As we discussed earlier, if the REMS program does not use a DMF, a full REMS proposal, which incorporates the modification, would need to be submitted to each application, and each of these proposals require individual review by the agency. So the use of a DMF for REMS consolidates modification submissions and makes the review of the REMS modification proposal simpler. Some other things to know regarding REMS modifications are: modifications only apply to drug products with final approval. Pending and tentatively approved ANDAs are not required to submit a REMS modification to their application and would be asked to withdraw the submission if they do. These application holders may need to submit an updated REMS upon resubmitting for full approval. If the FDA initiated the REMS modification, ANDA applicants may receive a REMS modification notification letter notifying them of the type of REMS modification and the details surrounding the proposed changes to the REMS. This concludes the second part of our presentation, and next we're going to go over a couple of more challenge questions. Challenge question number 4. Your application, which requires a REMS, is pending review, and your shared system REMS uses a Type 5 DMF, and it requires a minor modification. What should you submit to your application regarding the modification? A, nothing, no submission is necessary. B, a cover letter cross-referencing the REMS DMF and a letter of authorization from the DMF holder authorizing you to reference the DMF. C, a full REMS proposal, including REMS documents and materials and a REMS supporting document. Or D, both B and C. The answer to this question is A. You do not need to submit anything to your application regarding the modification. The modification only impacts approved applications. If you were to submit the cross-reference to the DMF, you would be asked to withdraw the submission. Pending applications, including those in complete response status and those that are tentatively approved, are not required to submit REMS modifications to their application. And now, challenge question number 5. This is the last challenge question that we have for you. You have an approved ANDA and you participate in the shared system REMS. The REMS uses a DMF and requires a major modification. What should you submit to your application? A, nothing, no submission is necessary. B, a cover letter cross-referencing the major modification to the REMS DMF. C, a full REMS proposal, including the REMS materials, documents, and a supporting document. Or D, a cover letter cross-referencing the REMS DMF and a letter of authorization from the DMF holder authorizing you to reference the DMF. The answer to this question is B. You should submit a cover letter that cross-references the major modification to the REMS. Since you have received final approval of your application, regardless of whether you're marketing the product, you are subject to the REMS modification and need to submit a cover letter referencing the REMS modification. This is assuming you have a valid letter of authorization on file and the DMF holder has not withdrawn your authorization. Finally, we'd like to share with you a couple of important and helpful resources that are available to the public. The first is the REMS at FDA website. This is nearly a one-stop shop and provides links to the currently approved shared system REMS. Next is the FDA REMS public dashboard. This is a user-friendly tool that improves access to the data regarding medications that have a REMS, and we've included the links on the slides. Lastly, we're providing a more complete list of resources. The first link here actually provides a convenient way to search for all FDA guidance documents in one single location. And with that link, we've provided a list of REMS-related guidance documents that you can search. And we've also included links to those 2 additional resources that we just mentioned. This concludes our presentation on the use of a DMF and modifications of REMS for generic drugs. Thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you again.
Thanks to all of our presenters for the excellent presentations. We'll now move into our next Q&A session panel. If you haven't had a chance to submit your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. And remember to indicate at the beginning of your question the speaker that you wish to answer your question. As time allows, we'll answer as many questions as we can. We'd also like to welcome to the panel discussion Dr. Rocky Shah, who works as an Associate Director of Science and Communication at OPMA. She serves as the Principal Advisor to the Director and provides staff leadership and direction in the area of assessment of manufacturing and facilities for ANDAs and NDAs, supplements including inspections and policy issues to support applications approval. Her prior roles in FDA include Branch Chief in OPMA, Team Leader in OGD, and Senior Research Scientist in OTR. And also joining us on the Q&A panel, we welcome Srinivas Behera, who serves as a Quality Assessor in the Office of Lifecycle Drug Products within OPQ. Srinivas has experience reviewing CMC aspects of pre-ANDA, bio-IND, and complex ANDA submissions, including nasal sprays and inhalation products. Looks like we have a few questions coming in right now. The first questions will be directed, the first 2 questions came in for Jayani Pereira. And here is the first question. You mentioned that the prior assessment is available to newly submitted DMFs and previously unreviewed DMFs. What if a DMF has undergone a completeness assessment review? Will the DMF be eligible for prior assessment?
Thank you for that question. Yes, the completeness assessment is not considered a full scientific review. So prior assessment can be performed on drug master files that have only received a completeness assessment. Thank you.
ANDA file, which will reference the DMF.
I'm sorry, Ray, I only heard part of the question. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I will repeat the question, and it is the following. If an original DMF is submitted and the GDUFA fee is paid, will this trigger a completeness assessment, or will the completeness assessment only be performed if there is a pending ANDA file which will reference the DMF.
Thank you for that great question. Yes, once a DMF is submitted, acknowledged by the agency, and the user fee has been paid, we perform the completeness assessment. But the DMF does not need to be referenced by an ANDA. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist. We have a couple of questions that came in for Daniel Oberzut, and here is the first question. Can a reclassification request be made if the CRL includes a major deficiency due to the DMF, but the DMF holder has communicated to the ANDA holder that all deficiencies were resolved and the DMF is now adequate prior to the submission of the MTM reclassification request?
Thank you for the question. And the answer to that is no, since there was another major deficiency on the complete response letter, that reclassification would be denied.
Thank you for responding to that question. We did have another question for Daniel Oberzut, and here is the question. Will a facility-based major to minor reclassification be considered if the complete response letter was sent before GDUFA III was active?
No. So the complete response letter should have been issued after October 1st, 2022 to be considered for reclassification.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question came in is for Dr. Rocky Shah, and here is the first question for Dr. Rocky Shah. If a company is classified OAI during a PAI, can they still request reclassification for the other drug products that was not part of the PAI but also have a CRL?
Thanks for that question. That's a really good question. So yes, they can, considering Dan's requirements are met, they can request reclassification request for other products. Of course, the withhold PAI product, they cannot, but other products, if they were part of surveillance OAI, they can request reclassification request.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Rocky Shah, and here is the question. What is the point of submitting an ANDA with a facility not ready for submission if no substantial review is going to start until the facility issue is resolved?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's up to the applicant. So applicant needs to decide if they want to send the application with facility marked as not ready for submission, not ready for inspection, or facility not ready. We hope that those cases will be as less as possible. But under GDUFA 2 or prior to GDUFA 3, there was nothing like that in our commitment letter for FNR, and we had seen some cases. So that's why the language was included in GDUFA 3. But we hope that applicant make that decision and really not send us the application if facility is not ready or it's not going to be ready, because no substantial review will take place until month 15. After month 15, it may change. We will start reviewing the submission. We will start reviewing even if we don't receive but we cannot comprehensively complete our evaluation if facility is still marked as not ready. So we hope that this situation will occur very, very rare. And this question actually is a great question to be asked to the applicants who would send us that FNR submissions.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we have a couple of questions that came in as a combination question referencing Jennifer Sarche and Charles Kearns. And so we'll read the first question and allow Jennifer to respond first. And then if Charles has any additional information, then she can pass over to Charles, and then we'll move to the next question. And here's the first question. What if a drug study is already approved? Can a REMS be implemented after an NDA or ANDA has already been on the market?
Well, thank you for that question. So the answer to that is yes. So if FDA becomes aware of new safety information and determines that a REMS is necessary to ensure the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks, then yes, the FDA may require REMS post-approval or after a drug has already been approved. And I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another combination question that mentions Jennifer and Chuck's name as referencing them. And here is the question. Does REMS apply to over-the-counter drugs or non-prescription drugs?
Hi, this is Chuck. I'll take that one. Thank you. So the answer is no. REMS do not apply to over-the-counter drugs. All medications have labeling that addresses the risks, but only certain medications require REMS.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we had a couple of questions that came in for Srinivas Bahara. And here is the first question. In a controlled correspondence / pre-ANDA response, the prospective applicant will be usually informed that the requested information will be evaluated based on submission during an ANDA review. Can you please comment on that?
Good afternoon, everyone. That's a very good question. Now, the response provided to the prospective applicant for the control correspondence of pre-ANDA is based on specific question and it is not a complete review. However, at the time of ANDA submission, a prospective applicant may provide additional supporting documents which need to be evaluated. Hope this clarification will help. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Dr. Bahara, and here is the question. Can the agency elaborate with examples on what are considered review issues?
In a meeting package or during presentation to the agency at the time of meeting, the prospective applicant may propose 3 to 4 characterization studies. These characterization studies may also serve as sometimes drug product controls. So the agency may provide feedback on the studies, but the control limit will certainly be a review issue. Say, for example, from inhalation standpoint, control limit of grouping of aerodynamic particle size distribution is considered a review issue. Also, as mentioned by Dr. Kumara Subramanian in his talk earlier, few other examples that can be considered as review issues are SA and impurity limits, etc. Hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving up to the beginning of our panelists, we have a couple more questions that came in for Dr. Gianni Pereira. And here is the first question. Does the prior DMF assessment occur on available for reference DMS, or can the completeness assessment be done along with prior DMF assessment?
Thank you for that great question. So the DMF doesn't have to be available for reference. Only the DMF fee has to be paid. And if the DMF gets assigned for prior assessment, it will get an administrative completeness assessment concurrent with the assignment of the DMF. And also, please note that the DMF fee is the only fee you would pay. No additional fees for submitting a prior assessment request. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question for Dr. Perari, and here is the question. Do we need a prior assessment request for an alternate API as per the GDUFA III prior to filing a PAS?
Thank you for that question. Yes, the prior assessment request should be submitted before you file the PAS. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question, and thank you to all of our panelists for responding to numerous questions that came in. Waiting just a few seconds to see if we see any more questions coming in through our question Q&A chat pod. Well, right now that appears to be it. It looks like we'll get to go on a break just a few minutes early. So thanks again, everyone, for answering numerous questions that came in. And it looks like we'll be able to enter into our break and till about 3:25.